Curiosity is a dangerous thing, my dear, Mama Adiola said, her voice cold and sharp. And now, you've seen far too much. Elizabeth tightened her grip on the talisman, her eyes locked on Mama Adiola. You won't win, she said, her voice trembling but defiant. The stormy night was loud and wild, with the wind crashing against the windows of Mama Adiola's big, fancy mansion. Elizabeth's heart was racing, beating faster with every step she took. The flashlight in her hand shook as she walked quietly through the dark hallways. Her breathing quick and shallow. Earlier, she overheard the servants talking about a hidden room, a mysterious place where Mama Adiola kept her most valuable secrets. Elizabeth couldn't stop herself. She had to know what was inside. The long hallway seemed to stretch forever, but soon she reached the huge wooden door at the very end. Her chest felt tight, her hands cold, as the air around her seemed heavy, almost as if the house itself was warning her to turn back. The door wasn't completely closed. It was open just a little, enough for her to see a soft, flickering glow from a candle inside. Elizabeth held her breath. This was it. The moment of truth. She gripped the flashlight tightly, took one deep breath, and carefully pushed the door open. Elizabeth stepped into the secret room, her eyes growing wide with shock. The walls were covered in strange, ancient symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Rows of shelves held bottles filled with mysterious potions, shimmering mirrors, and strange talismans that gave off an eerie energy. But at the center of the room, her attention was drawn to a large black mirror. It pulsed gently, almost as if it was alive, sending chills down her spine. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder and faster. Elizabeth's stomach tightened with fear. She turned, but before she could find a place to hide, the door slammed shut behind her. Standing in the doorway was Mama Adiola. Her face wore an unsettling, eerie smile that sent shivers through Elizabeth. So, Mama Adiola said in a voice that was cold and sharp like ice, you thought you could outsmart me? Elizabeth tried to speak, but her voice refused to come. Her throat felt dry, and her hands shook as she gripped the flashlight tighter, as if it could somehow shield her from the growing tension in the room. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, my dear, Mama Adiola continued, her words slow and deliberate as she stepped closer. And now, you've seen far too much. Before Elizabeth could react, Mama Adiola clapped her hands, and the black mirror flared with a blinding glow. Dark shadows rose from the floor like smoke, swirling rapidly around her. The shadows wrapped tightly around her wrists and ankles, dragging her to the ground. Elizabeth screamed for help, but the raging storm outside swallowed her cries. You'll stay here until I decide what to do with you, Mama Adiola said, her voice cold and filled with menace. Her eyes glinted with satisfaction as she clapped her hands again. The shadows pulled Elizabeth into the corner of the room, forming an invisible barrier that trapped her completely. Enjoy your stay, Mama Adiola sneered, her mocking laugh echoing through the room. She turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The heavy sound of the door closing left Elizabeth in silence, alone and imprisoned in the eerie, shadow-filled room. In her small, cozy apartment, Ada sat by the window, staring at the pouring rain. Her phone lay silent beside her. Elizabeth hadn't answered her calls all day, and Ada's worry grew heavier with each passing minute. She said she was going to that church again, Ada muttered, her voice filled with concern. Her instinct screamed that something was wrong. Without wasting another second, she grabbed her umbrella and stepped into the raging storm, determined to find her friend. Back in the secret room, Elizabeth sat on the cold, hard floor, tears rolling down her cheeks. Her fists pounded against the walls as she screamed for help, but the howling wind outside drowned out her cries. Around her, the shadows moved and whispered faintly, their voices eerie and distant, like echoes from another world. Then, something caught her attention. The black mirror at the center of the room began to shimmer and shift. Images appeared on its dark surface, moving like a sinister movie. Elizabeth's heart sank as she saw Ada walking through the storm, her umbrella barely shielding her from the downpour. Ada was heading straight toward the church. "No, Ada, don't come here," Elizabeth screamed, her voice desperate. But the magical barrier kept her cries locked inside the room. The images on the mirror changed. Elizabeth gasped in terror as she saw Mama Adiola standing by the church's main altar, her expression cold and cruel, a wicked smile playing on her lips. Ada reached the church, soaked to the skin from the relentless rain. The massive wooden doors groaned loudly as she pushed them open. Inside, the grand hall was unsettlingly silent, the dim light casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. "Elizabeth?" Ada called out, her voice trembling as it echoed through the empty space. "Are you here?" From the dark corners of the hall, Mama Adiola stepped forward, her figure looming and her presence both commanding and deeply sinister. "Welcome, child," Mama Adiola said, her tone warm and inviting, but her eyes gleamed with something dangerous, something malicious. "Are you searching for someone?" Ada froze, her instincts warning her to turn and run, but she swallowed her fear and stood her ground. "I'm looking for my friend, Elizabeth," she said firmly, though her voice wavered. "She didn't come home." Mama Adiola's lips curled into a wider smile. "Ah, yes, Elizabeth," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Such a curious girl. She's resting now." Ada clenched her fists. "Where is she?" she demanded, trying to hide the fear in her voice. Mama Adiola tilted her head, her expression calm but menacing. "Patience, child," she said softly. "Let me show you something first." In the shadowy secret room, Elizabeth's eyes were locked on the black mirror, which revealed every moment unfolding in the church. She pounded on the invisible barrier with all her strength, her cries desperate. "Ada, don't do it! It's a trap!" she shouted, but the magical confinement swallowed her words. In the main hall, Mama Adiola's calm and sinister demeanor didn't waver as she led Ada down a dim corridor to a small enclosed room. "Your friend is just inside," Mama Adiola said, her voice smooth and convincing. Ada stepped cautiously into the room, but it was empty. The only object inside was a strange glowing mirror, its light pulsing softly and casting eerie reflections on the walls. "Look into it," Mama Adiola urged, her tone dripping with subtle menace. Ada froze, her instincts screaming that something was horribly wrong. She glanced back at Mama Adiola, then at the glowing mirror. The pull of curiosity mixed with fear made her steps falter as she approached. Back in the secret room, Elizabeth screamed louder, tears streaming down her face. "Ada, don't look! It's a trap!" Her voice, though filled with panic, could not break through the magical silence. But Ada couldn't hear her. Just as Ada leaned forward, the mirror pulsed with dark energy, and a shadowy hand reached out, grabbing her wrist. Ada screamed, trying to pull away, but the mirror's grip was too strong. Elizabeth, watching helplessly, felt a surge of anger and determination. She searched the room she was trapped in, looking for anything that could help. Her eyes landed on a small glowing talisman on one of the shelves. "I have to try." Elizabeth stretched as far as she could. The talisman burned her handee as she grabbed it, but she didn't let go. The moment she hit, the barrier around her shattered, and she was free. Elizabeth burst out of the secret room and ran toward the main hall. As she approached, she saw Ada being pulled further into the mirror. "Let her go!" Elizabeth shouted, holding up the talisman. Mama Adiola turned, her eyes blazing with fury. "You shouldn't have escaped," she hissed. The two women stared each other down, the air crackling with tension. Elizabeth knew she was outmatched, but she refused to back down. Would she be able to save Ada? Or had she walked into an even greater danger? To be continued. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you never miss our exciting content.